When I was 12 years old, my family and I lived in an old apartment complex. I say old because it's been standing for well over 50 years by the time we moved in. Some of the residents have even claimed to have lived there their entire lives. Anyway, one particular thing that stuck out to me was that there was a strict no pets policy. The landlord actually elaborated on this, stating that a copious number of pets seemed to go missing around the area, so now they restricted them in hopes that it would end the problem there. As a child, I kept pretty much to myself. As for my brothers, who are 2 to 3 years older than me, they spoke and played with every kid that lived in the apartments and surrounding areas. Every day after school, they'd beg our mother for some change so they could go visit the candy lady. She was a local resident in the apartments who held a mini-mart in her apartment. Basically, she'd buy snacks in bulk ranging from gummy snacks to chips so she could resell it to the neighborhood kids. I'd never been at that point, but of course I was very curious. I asked my brothers if I could join them, but they declined. So I stole, $1 from my mom's purse and followed my brothers and their friends so I could find out where she lived. Upon stalking them, I finally found her apartment location. Though they stayed inside for a while, I figured I'd just go the next day. The next day after school, I took my hard-won stolen dollar and headed out to the candy lady's apartment. She opened the door. She was an older Caucasian lady with a very welcoming demeanor. She let me in and asked for my name. When I gave it to her, I asked for hers. She said to just call her the candy lady. She seemed very sweet and thoughtful, asking me about school and if I lived in the area. You know, kids don't usually come here alone. Where are your friends? She asked me. I explained I didn't really have any, and that I just preferred to observe. She seemed to sympathize with me a bit, because then she told me to take anything I wanted free of charge. As a child, I indulged in taking as much as I could carry. While thanking her on my way out, she said to me, "Come back anytime, my friend." I felt pretty jolly at that point. 1, I got some free snacks, and 2, I'd made a new friend. When I got home, I hid all my snacks in my drawers, returned my mother's stolen dollar, and felt pretty great overall. That is, until I went back. I returned maybe 3 or 4 days after the first time. When I knocked, she answered the door very frantically. I kind of got scared, so I told her I could just come back later. After realizing it was me though, she told me no worries and insisted I come in. When I did, she asked if I'd come back for some more free snacks. I gleefully told her yes, but she said the first time was just a kind gesture. From now on though, I'd have to help her with a few things to earn my free snacks. I was used to working for things, so I agreed. It was simple enough. Just throw out the trash for her. I figured she was old and probably couldn't go outside much. The weird thing was, she had me take her garbage out to the dumpsters in the apartments next door. Fast forward to a month later, it had become our regular schedule. After school, I'd do my homework, then head over to her place to throw her garbage, as well as collect my earnings. It was all easy breezy for a while. That is, until one day, when she forgot to tie the trash bag all the way. I had walked all the way down to the dumpsters next door, but before I threw it in, I decided I'd tie it up for her first. It was loose, so I had to untie it to fix it all the way. Curious little old me couldn't help but look inside. There, I saw wadded-up paper towels drenched in blood and hair. It was also more black plastic bags at the bottom. This freaked me out so much, I dropped the bag right then and there and booked it home. As soon as I got there, I cried to my mother about my horrific discovery. She said she'd go out and see it for herself after I told her which dumpster. When she returned, she said she didn't see what was inside because the candy lady was already there, tossing it out when she arrived. My mother didn't say a word to her and just left. She told me she didn't want me going out that far anymore and to stop helping with other people's chores, completely neglecting what I had initially told her. Surprisingly, I was able to just forget, more like ignore what happened, and go about my kid life like nothing was wrong. Then my brothers came rushing back one day. They anxiously explained to my mom, who was as nosy as ever regarding neighbors, that the candy lady had just been taken away by the police. My mother dismissed it and told us to mind our business. My brothers were bummed out though because of their lack of future snacks. As a child at this point in time, I really didn't understand the concept of police all that well, so I was pretty much clueless about what happened. About a month ago, I had dinner with my mom. I'm now 22 years old, by the way. My mother and I got to reminiscing, and we started talking about those old apartments. After discussing how old and broke down they were, I asked her if she remembered what I told her I saw. At first, she didn't. Then I mentioned that she was actually arrested by the police. I could see the shock of realization hit her. She said she remembered, and that she actually asked the landlord about it shortly after she was taken away. Apparently, the landlord told her that the candy lady was actually killing and skinning animals she found nearby, so she's the reason why pets weren't allowed. She was fucking killing them, and doing God knows what with the skin, and I'm the dumbass little kid who got rid of the evidence for her. For those of you wondering, the management of the apartments next to ours, the one with the dumpsters we used to dispose of the evidence, caught wind of the horrible smell reeking from them, and from there they were able to catch the candy lady. All I know is I'm glad I never went back once I realized what were in those bags of trash she had me take out multiple times. P.S. If you're the candy lady reading this, I refuse to believe you were my first friend. This happened about a year ago. I'm 16 now. He's going to be 20 in August. We met through the internet initially. It turned out he lived in a city right next to my village. I was 12 then. He was 16. We quickly lost contact. After 2 years, I texted him again because my friends edited a photo of him and dared me to send it. He seemed really nice, and we had lots of shared interests as well. Talking with him felt so natural. I was used to age differences, because for some reason I never meet people my age. I really didn't think too much about it. He took the bus to my village a couple of times, and we hit it off pretty well. He even met my best friend. Then I heard he'd had a Skype call with one of my online friends specifically. He told her his last girlfriend supposedly killed herself because of him, because of the horrible things he said to her. My friend felt like he was beginning to crush on her, maybe because she was too nice and kind. The other friend voiced her own worry over him turning her into his ex. She was understandably grossed out. My friends talked with him about it, and I asked why he'd told them but not me. He said it was because I was too immature to understand. I was upset. I was the person who had introduced him to my friend group to begin with, and now he was forcibly trying to cut me out of it. Thankfully, my friends had had enough of him though and cut him out instead. I did not though. You see, I felt really bad for him. He was an orphan, he lived alone, he had issues with alcohol, and a lot of trouble with depression as well. Losing 3 people could have been so devastating in that mindset, so I kept messaging him, perhaps out of pity. He turned very, very creepy, very fast. Suddenly, he began to call me darling. I was over the moon because I was a kid that had caught feelings. A little puppy crush on someone I knew I could never date, but who gave me that hope that maybe, just maybe, I could. He started to spend more time with me, sent me pictures and photos of him going on about his day. Nothing too unusual. Until one time we called while I was busy playing a game on my laptop. I don't remember what we were talking about exactly, but I remember him being so excited that 15 is the legal age in Poland. I remember feeling excited too, but I don't really know why. I remember being very, very stiff as well. even though this was just a harmless phone conversation. The joke was, until February, because I'd turned 15 then. That was when he was supposed to visit. I felt like I owed him everything, just because he had issues with his mental health. He told me that his psychiatrist had said she had never met someone so young who had lived through so much, even though our conversation wasn't about depression at all. He made me feel so bad for him. That's why I never said anything about the things he did that creeped me out or made me feel unsafe. I was afraid he'd feel worse and do something horrible to himself or others. He told me he'd tried to kill himself a couple times. So what if I was the reason he'd try again? He had already told me about all of his issues with loneliness and abandonment after all. When he visited, I learned he still had feelings for this supposedly dead ex-girlfriend. He played a song that was their song, and every word in it described their relationship while we were in my room. He was close to crying, but I had no idea what to do. He'd put me in this situation, even though he knew I wasn't equipped to deal with this stuff. I remember after that I got quite upset and told him I didn't want to be cheered up. I just didn't. I wanted him to leave me alone. So he sent me tens of texts, pictures, and cheap cheer-up lol things he found on his phone. It was the one time I set some sort of boundary, and he broke it immediately, with an "oops, sorry, too late" message following. I had a school trip in October, and I had a pretty good time from what I remember. For some reason, I remember I just lost all my feelings for him right then and there very suddenly. Maybe it's because, for once, I didn't force myself to feel bad for him and constantly check if he was online, wanted to talk, or if something happened. Maybe because all my friends thought we were going to date, and it was really unnerving to me that they never saw anything wrong with it. I cut contact with him very, very slowly. I started by deleting him off of things he never checked. Then I blocked his number. Then I blocked him on Facebook. Finally, he noticed, but I never looked back. Later on, through yet another friend, the only one that kept in contact with him, I learned that his ex wasn't actually dead at all. Or maybe she was? There were screenshots of him talking with a family member about the funeral, then screenshots of him talking about moving in with a girl 2 years older than he was, who was the love of his life, same name as his ex and everything. He then sent a picture that was supposed to prove he was in a psych ward or something, but then even my friend refused to believe him. I can't really tell what he was lying about in the end, or even if he was lying at all. Next school year, I'll be going to a school in the city he lives in, and I know he's still there, so I really hope we don't meet. I was reminded of him just last week. After almost 5 years of not hearing from him, I saw him again. I'll try my best to summarize this nightmare. Some things to note which are important to the story. 1. It happened in 2017, and during that time we went a whole year without having neighbors on either side. So basically, we were crammed in between 2 empty houses. 2. The streetlight in our lot had broken, and despite multiple reports to the council to fix it, nobody ever did. One evening, my family went out for groceries. I was left behind home alone. The gate was still wide open when they left, because the water pipe was located outside. I used it all the time back then because I had rabbits, so I used that water to fill their water bowls. That day was no different. The sun was already setting by the time I went out to fill the bowls, feed the rabbits, and then lock the gate. It was literally 5 minutes after I locked it that someone was outside. Since the sun was already low on the horizon, and with the street light broken, I could barely make out his face. The man was outside with a van, yelling for my attention. He said something about his company sending him over to do some property surveillance. It was suspicious, all right, so I ignored him and went inside. Later on, when the night got dark, my family still had not returned yet. I was inside watching Chicken Little when I suddenly heard some commotion outside. I didn't directly look at it, but I stole some glances. I could make out a figure outside, literally in front of my gate. He was shouting for my attention once again, and guess who it was? Yep, the same guy from before. I recognized his voice again. I paid him no attention. After a seemingly long few minutes, it got quiet outside. I took another peek out only to see, holy shit, he was attempting to climb into my house. I was so shocked I couldn't move. Luckily, that time we had a dog named Buck, who passed away not long after, unfortunately. He was probably napping in one of his hiding spots and sensed the man's presence. As soon as the guy saw Buck coming at him, he stopped climbing and rode away on his bike. No more van. And that was that. Ever since then, though, I kept seeing him around. How do I know it was him when I couldn't even see the face in the first place? Well, because after that particular incident, every now and then there was always this person hanging literally outside our gate with his bike. He was always making this weird sound too, like when you purse and smack your lips. Every time I tried to report it to my dad, the guy would just ride away as soon as he saw my dad checking. One time I was at the backyard collecting my laundry. If you stand on the left side of my gate but facing in, you can see the area in our backyard where we wash and dry out the clothes. I saw him standing right there, making those weird sounds again, which drew my attention. I yelled out for my dad, and once again he saw my dad and booked it immediately out of there. This had been going on now for almost a month. While he hadn't actually posed a physical threat, it was enough for me to feel uncomfortable and unsafe to even want to go out at night by myself. Oh, but it got worse. My room is on the outer side of the house, so basically I have a window that faces the front. My room is situated on the right side, so my direct view is the overgrown bushes covering the fence. If I peek my head out that window and look to the right, I can clearly see the gate. One night I was in my room doing some work on my desk, I think. The window was to my left. I'd left it open, as I always liked the night breeze coming in. I don't remember exactly how long I was working for, but all of a sudden I felt this strong feeling of dread washing over me. It was like I wasn't safe in the comfort of my own room anymore, like I was being watched. I looked out the window and tried to see in the dark. I could barely make it out, but there he was. I knew it was him. Somehow he'd managed to squeeze in between the bushes and was hanging on to the fence. He saw me, and I could feel a smile come over his face. He made those awful lip-smacking sounds again. I booked it the fuck out of there like a bolt of lightning. Again, I reported it to my dad, but again he'd somehow made it out of there before we could catch him in the act. Because of his amazing disappearing act, my dad and sister sometimes thought that some of the incidents were just imagined. Whenever they turned their eyes outside, they would see nothing, but I was the one who saw him every time. I know for a fact that it was real though, that he was real, and it was the same person every time. This continued on for another month or so 2 months in total. He'd come and taunt me with his lip-smacking skill, and rode away before my dad or sister could ever get a good look at him. Then one day he just stopped coming. I didn't see or hear his stupid lip-smacking sounds anymore. That is, until last week. I was home alone again. My sister was caught up at work, and my dad had left to pick up my brother from his workplace. I was sitting in the living room watching the TV when I heard that awfully familiar lip-smacking sound. At this point, our streetlight was still broken. We'd installed some fence lights though. Somehow though, this guy figured it out and hid in the dark where the light was too faint to reach. I could see he was out there with his bike again, only this time I heard him giggle. I've never heard him giggle before, and this wasn't the cute kind. It sounded malicious. I tried my hardest to ignore him, to not pay any attention, but he was out there making all sorts of noises. Over a year ago, we got a new dog, Gibbs. He was a rescued stray. He must have heard the man too. As soon as the guy saw Gibbs start chasing after him, he rode away again. That was last week. 5 years ago, he terrified me to the point where I was so afraid of being outside on my own at night, even if it were just to pick up laundry. Sometimes at night, I couldn't even sleep without checking every corner of the house just to make sure he was not there. And for a short period, I even slept with the lights on. Even though he didn't exactly do anything physically threatening, him playing psycho tricks over such a long period on me is enough to make me feel unsafe in my own home. Just when the man was finally exiting my head, he came back at the perfect time. Worse still, I don't think I've ever seen his face, but I think he has seen mine. I hope I won't ever have to see his face, because his presence alone is malicious as it is. So to give some context, I'm a small-statured girl, about 5'1". I guess that makes me look easily preyed on, I don't know. One night at around 9:30 p.m., I realized I had no more pads and needed to go get some. Walgreens closed at 10, but it wasn't that far away, so I decided to head there right away. The Walgreens I headed to wasn't exactly in the best area. It was one of those neighborhoods that wasn't too safe, but was surrounded by other safe neighborhoods, so it wasn't exactly the worst either. I parked my car directly behind the door so I could see it from the entrance. There were spots in front of me that were closer to the door, but they were there in complete darkness. I would rather have to walk a little further from a well-lit spot than be hidden in the darkness. I was the only car in the parking lot too. I was on FaceTime with a friend, and I started walking toward the doors. I realized my car may still have been on. It's a push start, so sometimes I forget if I turned it off or not, but I always lock it regardless. I turned around to go check if it was still on. As I locked my car door and started walking away, a car came pulling in super quick. I immediately felt uneasy. I'm really paranoid by nature, so I just hurried up and walked inside. As I went inside, my friend had to leave from the FaceTime. I made my way to the aisle and couldn't seem to find the pads at all. I was in the adult diaper area trying to find some. I suddenly had that feeling that someone was following me, as I heard footsteps and just felt weird. There was only me and the employee in the store though. Maybe they thought I was stealing, as it was about to close. This kinda pissed me off, but whatever, do your job. I kept looking for the pads, and as I turned a corner, I noticed that whoever was following me kept ducking off into random aisles. As I turned to the next one though, the person wasn't quite fast enough, and I caught a glimpse of them. It was not an employee. It was a 5'4" or 5'5" older man, maybe late 40s or early 50s. He had frosted tips and looked like he was trying to look younger, but looked like a sketchy man instead. I felt weird, but I thought my paranoia was overthinking me. I grabbed my pads and went to the register. I kid you not when I tell you this man ran to the register empty-handed. If you would have been in the store as long as me, 15 minutes and still had nothing on you, that was weird. He grabbed some sodas from the register fridge. I checked out and walked to the side of the store by the coolers in the photo area. This way I could see the register and the door, but they couldn't see me. I called my boyfriend and told him what had happened, and to come immediately. The man took forever to check out his 2 soda bottles. Then he exited. I told the employee what's going on. She looks outside only to see that he's parked on the driver's side of my car. He drove a black older van model. Think 2000s Pacifica or something like that. She said he had been acting weird and antsy too, and when I walked away, he immediately asked where I'd gone. Thankfully, she let me stay there until he left, which took 7 minutes. My boyfriend arrived shortly after. I told him the description of the car, and he told me that as he pulled into the lot, he'd seen that car circling the building a few times, then hiding in the darkness of the back parking lot. Yikes. I haven't returned to that location ever since. This story didn't happen to me, but to a very close male friend of 7 years. I was hanging out with him and a couple of other friends, and we were talking about all of our creepy experiences. Here is the story from his perspective. A little bit of background. I was 16 years old when this happened, living in Amman City, the capital of Jordan in the Middle East. I was in high school at the time. I used to weigh 85 kilograms and was 192 centimeters tall. I was a calm but somewhat intimidating person, at least if I wanted to be. I never really messed with anyone though unless I was provoked first. I had just gotten off school this day and decided I wanted to go downtown because I was bored. I really didn't want to stay at home. Actually, I wanted to get some DVDs and games to enjoy later. So I decided to take the bus, as I wanted to save on some money. I had to take a taxi to even get to the bus stop though, which was about less than 10 minutes by car. I stopped a coming taxi. Inside the vehicle appeared a light-skinned man with black, greasy hair, wearing a worn-out dark green shirt and an old pair of jeans. He looked to be between the ages of 30 to 34. He addressed me through the passenger window. "Hey there, where do you want to go?" "I need to go to the bus stop that takes me downtown. It's about 10 minutes away from here." "Oh, well, I can take you downtown if you'd like. I'm gonna pass by that area anyway, so I can drop you off there and you don't even have to pay me." At this point, a red flag should have gone off in my head, but I thought maybe this man just wanted to be kind. I really didn't want to go through the hassle of taking more than one vehicle, so I decided to hop into his car, and we would be on our merry way. Looking back on it now, though, this was a big fucking mistake. Now, there are different ways to head downtown, and I only knew a couple of them. As the man was driving, he started to take different routes that I had never seen before. Since I wasn't familiar with them, no alarm bells were ringing yet. I assumed he must be taking a shortcut to get away from traffic or something. By this point, though, 20 minutes had passed by, and I began to feel very uneasy. Usually, from the bus route I take, you only need 20 minutes to get downtown when there's little to no traffic, but I brushed it off once again. Then suddenly, though, the man began to speak in his calm yet very suspicious tone. "Hey man, do you mind if I use your phone for a moment? I want to see if you have any videos or music I can send via Bluetooth." I found this to be a very strange request, but as the man was giving me a free ride already, and the fact that I didn't have anything private in my phone anyway, I handed it over to him for a moment. I didn't want to be impolite, I was just trying to break this awkward atmosphere. He started to play with my phone for a bit, before proceeding to put it with his own under the empty space of the driver's door handle. Doubt began to circle in my mind. I felt very vulnerable suddenly without my phone. Despite my doubts though, all I could think to do was stare to the window outside. The feeling of dread and uneasiness only continued to grow. I was not able to tell where we were anymore. The man kept on driving. I started to see many empty roads, with only desert on both the right and left sides. The only things around were various old, worn-out, rusty shipping containers. It was getting very dark at this point. This is where things get even creepier. The man proceeded to pick up his own phone and began to speak to someone at the end of the line, shouting in a very angry voice. "I'm gonna fuck you up, you motherfucker. You better prepare yourself. I'm coming to beat your ass, you son of a bitch." As soon as the man ended the call, I knew something was absolutely wrong. Looking more closely at the phone he was holding, I was able to recognize the phone he had was the type that didn't have Bluetooth. Alarm bells started ringing very loudly in my head. That whole call had just come out of nowhere, and I could feel a bunch of dread. My fear was absolutely real. I asked him for my phone back, growing very nervous and impatient with each word escaping my mouth. He looked at me with this kind of funny look and said, "I just wanted to see what you've got on your phone, you know." By this point, I had enough. I sternly told him to give it back. The anger and fear was barely contained in my voice. He hesitantly obliged after muttering to himself for a while. I knew at this point I had to get out of this taxi. Feeling a rush of adrenaline, I decided to pretend I was talking to my parents and created a scenario where there was an emergency and I had to get back right now. I began telling the man that someone was waiting for me and needed me immediately. I told him to drop me off right here and right now. I was seeing an upcoming traffic light and then nothing from then on. I knew this was my only chance of escape. I was not sticking around any longer to know where this man was taking me to. God fucking knows where we even were already. As soon as the man stopped at the light, I spoke to him in my most intimidating voice and told him to open the passenger door. Luckily, there were also a couple of cars stopped right next to us. Thank God the man just responded with a menacing look and pressed the unlock button. I sprinted out of that car faster than you could even say, "Fuck this shit, I'm out." I went straight to a small run-out coffee break stop in the middle of nowhere, as that taxi sped off at 100 miles per hour. I went outside and asked the server if downtown was close by. Completely out of breath and with sweat dripping from my forehead, the server looked at me with a confused and irritated face. "You know you're far out of the capital, right? Heading to the city of Zarka?" Shit, I thought. Holy shit. I proceeded to call my parents to come pick me up from this middle of nowhere. God knows I'm not taking the taxi to get back home after this, or anytime soon. Thinking about it after a while, it's clear the man had planned on kidnapping me from the start, trying to take away my phone so I wouldn't be able to call for help, and proceeding to pretend he was having a fight with someone on the phone to secretly message his buddies that he was close by with me. Hey there everyone, I wanted to tell you about an experience my brother and I shared 2 years ago. I've made a post over an r/paranormal, but I decided to repost it here too. So, we were deciding to go somewhere haunted during the day. There's this old cemetery in Santa Cruz we decided to check out. We go in, walk around, nothing out of the ordinary happened, so we decided to leave. The cemetery is on a supposedly haunted road that leads up into the woods. This road is said to be haunted by a lady in white that tries to hitchhike in your car. I had forgotten this fact until after the day. Alright, so along this road we're driving down, it leads to a forest area. A couple of miles down from the cemetery, you can pull to the side of the road and walk along this hiking trail. We decide to hike this very same trail. I'd completely forgotten the road was supposed to be haunted as well, so I wasn't even looking for anything paranormal at all. Anyway, we start hiking this trail in the afternoon. 10 minutes in, we stumble along some abandoned train tracks and a barely standing bridge for the train that used to run along those tracks. It looked really cool, so we decided to head down to investigate this hill right by the bridge that lets you go underneath the dilapidated area. We go down there and start to mess around, looking at all the cool architecture. After we had had our view, we started back up the little hill that led back to the trail. When we finally managed to get to the top, we were a little bit exhausted because the hill was kind of steep. You also had to use the trees around you as leverage to climb back up. We're standing around back on the trail when we both notice something out of the ordinary. We can both hear a voice, almost like a grown man's, shouting and screaming very angrily. When I say angry, I mean absolutely furious. The voice sounded like the rage of a man that wanted to murder someone. We quieted down. We could tell the voice was still very far away. It almost sounded like it was coming from the mountains around us, more than 500 feet away for sure. We both looked at each other. What the fuck is that? We stood around listening for 15 seconds. Next thing we know, the voice had suddenly come down the trail from what sounded like hundreds of feet away to being right down at the very end of it. The inhuman speed with which the voice came closer seemed so unnatural. I noticed it was now coming down the trail as well. I was thinking to myself, this voice sounded like it was from someone who was ready to kill. But the weird thing was, the voice was speaking and what I can only say was gibberish. I could not understand one single word it was saying. I instantly got this fight or flight feeling all in my body as the voice started getting very loud and moving closer to us at completely inhuman speeds. I told my brother to pick up some huge sticks with me to defend ourselves. Even though this voice had come out of nowhere and was moving down the trail at lightning speed, I still had the assumption it must be some kind of crazy person out in the mountains, having an episode or something. We picked up those sticks and sprinted down the trail back to the car. Now, here's the weird part. As we're running away from this voice that's coming down the other end, I suddenly hear the voice come up right behind us in a single instant. It sounded like he must be no more than 10 feet away, chasing us back to the car. I turned around, even though I didn't want to see. I just had to know how close this psycho was to us. As I looked back though and heard the voice right behind me, I could see no one there. I told my brother to run faster because the voice right behind us was yelling in absolute rage, but I couldn't see anyone behind us. We started picking up speed, and the craziest thing in my entire life happened. The voice panned around us, almost like 360-degree audio. I could hear the voice yelling gibberish right into my ear. Then it started panning to my left through the trees just off the trail. Then it was right in front of us. Then it slid to the right, and then back behind us, all in just a matter of seconds. At this point, my brother and I were obviously very creeped out and ran the rest of the way back to the car. The voice followed us all the way back. I remember hearing it panning around us, reverberating all through the woods, and I started praying to Jesus Christ to help me come out of this alive. After we made it around halfway down the trail to my car, the voice just suddenly disappeared. I remember slowing down, completely exhausted, and we started talking about what we'd just heard. I asked my brother if he'd also heard it panning around us in circles, and he said he'd heard the same thing. At that point, I knew I was not hallucinating or imagining things. I asked my brother if he'd heard it as gibberish as well. He said he'd heard the same thing. We finally got into the car and drove the hell out of there in a heartbeat. I remember the car ride was silent for about 5 minutes as we sat there thinking about what just happened. That's when I remembered. The whole road was supposed to be haunted, not just the cemetery. I had been down that very same trail alone a few months before this experience, and nothing weird happened to me then. This was one of the most unexplainable things I ever experienced in my entire life. To this day, I've never been back down that trail, and I never plan on going back either. Everything I've written down is the absolute truth. I haven't altered a single thing. The Santa Cruz area and mountains are known for cults and dark magic being performed in them, I guess. If you have any questions about our experience, feel free to ask.